inspired and whatnot. But the words, of course, that our Lord quoted as he hung on the cross, described so well his crucifixion. Only God suffered for us. Wonderful words. Let's just bow our heads in prayer. Father God, as we look into your word this morning, I just pray that you will open our minds to hear you speak. Set aside, Lord, the many distractions that constantly come at us and help us to focus on you. That we may hear your voice. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, most of us are familiar with the old science fiction, the line of science fiction where the aliens come down and say, "Take me to your leader." Right? We all know that. It's become a joke at times. You know, I mean, if some aliens were to land out here today, they came up to us and said those infamous words, who would you take them to? Of course, in all the movies, in all the sci-fi movies, of course, it's the President of the United States, right? I mean, after all, isn't the President of the United States the leader of the free world? No political comments. There's another famous quote that I suppose it's actually a bit of a misquote taken from the movie Apocalypse Now. It says, "Do you know who's in charge here?" That's important to know sometimes who's in charge, isn't it? Particularly in times of uncertainty or crisis, it's important to know who's in charge. Who actually has the authority to make the decisions that count, the decisions that really matter. Now, sometimes the person who's in charge is also the leader. Sometimes not. The person who has the legitimate authority to make the decisions, to write their name down, kind of thing, that's the person in charge. But the person that the people listen to, the person that the people follow, that's the leader. There's a great quote about leadership. It says, anybody who thinks of themselves as a leader, but who has no one following them, is only going for a walk. Isn't that true? What makes somebody a leader? Somebody has to be following them. Sometimes none of it's clear. Sometimes it's not clear who the leader is. Sometimes it's not clear who's in charge. Sometimes there isn't one person that everyone wants to follow. I want to follow this person wants to follow that person, this person wants to be in charge, this person's going for a walk. Sometimes it's not clear. And that's when trouble arises. When the leadership, when who's in charge, when they're not the same, and when it's unclear, things can start to break down and things can be a bit of a mess and you just never know what's going to happen. So imagine what it was like. You've got this massive group of 2 million maybe people wandering in the desert 3,500 years ago. They've just come out of slavery where they knew who was in charge. It was the people with the whips. They knew who was in charge. They're out in the desert. They're a really diverse group. They've come from all kinds of backgrounds. I mean, we usually think of them as being all descendants of Abraham. So, Isaac and Jacob, so, some kind of homogeneous group. But it may not have been that. It may have been people who had been slaves from other nationalities that all escaped together. They could have had different backgrounds, different languages, different religious beliefs. We don't know. Very diverse. They're all thrown together in this diverse, difficult situation. And they needed leadership. Now, as we've been going along through these books of the Bible, we know, of course, there's Moses, right? And he obviously was the leader. But it's not always that way. I mean, if someone had come to them and said, "Take me to your leader," we think, thought automatically that it would have been uncontestably Moses, or who's in charge, it's Moses. It's unlikely that anyone else would have said anything different, but you know what? It seems as we read in the Bible, as we read particularly in the book of Numbers, that not everybody was okay with that. And I guess when you've got 2 million people, that's to be expected. There are 3 different incidents in the book of Numbers that jump out to show that there was confusion about who was in charge, or who was the leader, or who should be in charge and should be the leaders. And it got me doing some thinking. The first one we find it in Numbers chapter 12. Numbers chapter 12. And the NIV just says this. It entitles it, Miriam and Aaron opposed Moses. And we start with this. It says, Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses, they asked? Hasn't he also spoken through us? And then those words, and the Lord heard this. And what's going on here? Well, first of all, who are Aaron? Who are Miriam and Aaron? Who are they? Miriam and Aaron, who are they? Yeah, they're Moses' brother and sister. They're the older sister and older brother. Moses was the baby of the family. And you know, that always has some complications, you know, when you're the baby and you're the guy who rises to the top, and your older siblings, you know, the ones who changed your diaper and things like that, you know, and they're looking at you and saying, who is this guy? You know, he's in charge. Who put this guy in charge? You know, because Moses, Aaron and Miriam, they were not nobodies. Aaron was the high priest. He got to do things that even Moses didn't get to do. You know, he got to go into the Holy of Holies, you know, on the Day of Atonement. Moses wasn't allowed to do that. Miriam was a prophetess. She spoke for God. She spoke words that God gave. They weren't nobodies. But they had a problem. They're looking at their brother and saying, wait a minute. You know, who put him in charge? What about us? What about us? What does that sound like to you? What does that sound like to you? So there's a problem when it comes in groups of people, and when there's someone in charge, that there's always going to be someone who will look at that leader, will look at that person, and they're going to be jealous. They're going to say, what about me? I'm important too, but he gets all the credit. Well, what about me? I want to be recognized for who I am. I want to be recognized for the fact that God speaks through me. Why do I always have to listen and be subordinate to my little brother? That was the youngest in the family, of course. I'm on Moses' side there, you know. But, you know, jealousy has a way of messing things up when it comes to leadership, doesn't it? So we find Miriam and Aaron trying to push themselves forward into a place that they don't belong. Not being content with the place that God has given them. And it's not, as I said, it's not a small place. But jealousy messes things up. We've got to look at the honor that it is that God has given us to do the things that God has placed, to do the things that God has assigned to us. Not to look and say that someone else is more important. That makes me unimportant. But to recognize that wherever God has placed you is the place that you need to thrive. Because what they were doing was they were undermining the work that God is trying to do through Moses and also through them. Jealousy is a poison that affects any group of people that needs leadership, because it undermines that leadership. And without the leadership, where is that direction? where is the direction that they need to go. How you look at yourself in relation to other people is very important. And never underestimate the value of where you are, thinking that somehow you could and should be somewhere else, that somebody else is, that you want their position. God didn't make us that way. God didn't make us that way. Now you move along and we go ahead a couple of chapters. We're just jumping ahead here to chapter 16. And we find a story about 3 other men who had some issues with what's going on. They weren't too happy either. I'm not going to read all 14 verses. We just don't have time for all that. But we get the story of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. It's really 2 stories going on at the same time. They just happen to converge. And again, we've got 3 men, and they've developed their own group of followers, and they're not happy with the leadership that's going on. And they each have their own reasons, and we'll look at them separately. But they aren't content with the leadership that's going on. So we start with Korah. Now, interestingly, about Korah and who he is, Korah is a Levite. Now, we've talked about the Levites before. The Levites were given a special role by God in ministering in the tabernacle, later the temple. They weren't given land because their job was to, in effect, be the ministers of the people. And Korah was what was called a Kohathite. Now, interestingly, of who else were Kohathite Levites was a guy named Moses and a guy named Aaron. So Korah and Moses and Aaron were related to each other. Now, they could have been first cousins, second cousins, or 40th cousins, I don't know. But they were related somehow. They were both, they were all part of the same group of Israelites, having a special place in, a special place in the kingdom of God. And Korah, and they said, we read this in verse 3, it says, they came as a group to oppose not just Moses, but Moses and Aaron, and said to this, get this, to say to the leaders, you have gone too far. You've gone too far. Moses and Aaron, you've gone too far. The whole community is holy. Every one of them, and the Lord is with them. So why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly? So Korah is looking at them, and what is he accusing them of? He is accusing them of taking the leadership upon themselves and setting themselves up above the people. He's not recognizing that God has given them that position, and he's saying, you know what? Everybody should be there. But as we read on, we're going to see something. At first glance, it looks as if Korah and his followers are trying to make the community into some kind of democracy. Sounds good, doesn't it? We live in Canada. We like democracy. We think it's valuable. We think it's the way it should be. We're all equal. No one's above another. Who should ever set themselves above everybody else? If we don't like the leader, what do? We kick them out. We have an election coming up next week. If we don't like the mayor, vote him out. That's just the way it's supposed to be. And many countries in the world, they don't do that. They have fixed elections to people. We like democracy. We even have churches that are democratic. You guys didn't get a choice about whether Donna and I were appointed here. If you don't like us, you can write to headquarters and say, get rid of them. But nobody's ever going to ask you to vote on whether or not we're your officers. You're stuck with us until the army says otherwise. But if you're in a Baptist church, you vote this pastor in. You don't like him, you vote him out. You get the leaders, the elders, you got to vote them in. You don't like them, you vote them out. It's all democratic, We're going to do this plan. The membership votes, yes, we like that plan, we'll do it. We don't like it, we vote no. All democratic. Sounds good. Sounds like that's what Korah is wanting. But there's a hidden agenda there. There's a hidden agenda. You see, because Moses, he talks back to Korah, and he actually echoes those same words to him. And he looks at Korah and says, no, Korah, you have gone too far. You have gone too far. And in what way has he gone too far? In part, again, he's undermining the God-given leadership that Moses and Aaron have received. Because remember, they didn't take it upon themselves. If you'll remember going way back, Moses didn't want any of this at all. Right back in the burning bush, he said, God, please send someone else. He didn't want it. But God appointed him, God appointed Aaron. But Moses sees something in Korah, and he looks at him and says, isn't it enough for you that God, the God of Israel, has separated you from the rest of the Israelite community and brought you near himself to do the work at the Lord's tabernacle and to stand before the community and minister to them? You know, isn't that great? God has done all this kind of stuff. And then he goes, he has brought you and all your fellow Levites near himself. But now you are trying to get the priesthood too. See, he's finding that Korah has an ungodly ambition. He wants something more for himself. He's the one who's trying to seize position. We often look at ambition as being a good thing, but his ambition is self-seeking and self-serving. And we see that, you know, in politicians all the time, don't we? You know, they want power for their own sake. And sometimes that turns into terrible dictatorships. And it can happen in churches too, where someone will get themselves in a position and they will rule with an iron fist. You know, what I say goes. And God help anybody who opposes that pastor or that elder or that local officer or that, you know, music leader or that whatever. It's all about them. They have the power. They want the power. You know, it's hard for us to believe, but, you know, God never set the church up to be a democracy. Sometimes rubs us the wrong way. Ambition is not a high Christian value. We need to be looking for what God has appointed us to do. And not look to usurp the authority that belongs to somebody else. Now, that being said, those who are leaders, whether it was Moses and Aaron or anybody else or me or anyone, leadership is not a dictatorship. You know, and even if we're appointed by God, it doesn't mean that we have the authority to do whatever we want. We're going to look at that in a minute. God is always looking for people who are willing to step up to leadership, but not to take that which is not theirs. In some ways, we don't have the problem of people trying to seize leadership. In a lot of churches, sometimes the problem is a lack of people willing to step up and take what God has given. But ambition does not serve the church well. Servanthood serves the church well. And then there's the story of Dathan and Abiram. It continues on. They don't seem to be looking to seize power in the same way, but they're looking at Moses and Aaron and saying, guys, you failed us. You failed us. Verse 14, he says, 13, 14 says, isn't it enough that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the desert? You get that? You brought us out of a land flowing with milk and honey. What are they saying? You brought us out of Egypt. Right? Because that's what they did. And how are they describing it? As a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, does that ring a bell to any of you? Isn't that the description of the land that they're going to? You know, you brought us out of this wonderful place. Yeah, where you were slaves and you were beaten. You know, you brought us out here to die in the desert. Wait a minute. When they had no food, God gave them manna and He gave them quail. When they had no water, God gave them water. When the Egyptians were chasing them, He killed them. It doesn't seem like God's left them to die anywhere. But the problem is they haven't got to the promised land. Now, we've jumped ahead in the story, and next week we're going to look at this a little bit more on, like, why aren't they in the promised land? Because, you know, strangely enough, at this point in time, they should be, and it's their own fault, not Moses' fault. We're going to look at that next week. But they're accusing Moses of failing to get them where they belong. It's true that great leaders inspire great followers. You know, and that's one of the greatest jobs of a leader, is to inspire people to follow. And if nobody follows a leader, then, as I've said, then they're not really leading, are they? But there's also a truth that no one can be a great leader of a people who will not follow. You get that? Nobody can be a great leader of a people who will not follow. And this is a problem that the Israelites kept having, is a refusal to follow. Moses didn't fail, the people failed. And if we fail to accomplish what it is that God is looking for us to do, we need to look at both sides. Do we have good leadership who's inspiring? And am I following the way I need to follow? And the problem with the Israelites is they weren't following. Great followers can make even mediocre leaders into a success. There was a speech I heard a number of years ago. I tried to find it, and I couldn't find it. I believe it was talking about when Ronald Reagan was being inaugurated as president. I know it was a president, I think it was Ronald Reagan. And in this speech, whoever it was saying, it says, you know, that his greatness will depend upon the people. You know, and that they could make him a great president simply by how well they followed, how well they did it, and he would get the credit. And in the same way, people can destroy a president, can destroy a leader too. How many people, you know, said that that's exactly, they got to work to make Donald Trump fail because they didn't like him, right? We heard that. So how silly is that? Whether you like him or not, whether you like the president, whether you like the leader or not, how silly is it to make the leader fail? Because if the leader fails, who else fails? Everybody. Great followers can make even a mediocre leader into a success. Because really what really matters, the only thing that matters, is whether we actually reach our goals, assuming that God-given goals. Who gets the credit doesn't matter. Dothan and Abiram were saying they were looking at the wrong places. They were failing to see that they needed to achieve their goals and they needed to be good followers. The third story about leadership I found very interesting. Because, you see, it'd be easy to assume at this point in time that what I'm talking about is that everybody needed to just accept that Moses was in charge and Moses was the leader. Right? That's what it sounds like. And they were failing to do that. And of course, the easy lesson out of that would be that you guys have to be just the same and recognize that I'm in charge and I'm the officer and you guys just follow and do everything I say. That'd be the easy lesson. But that's not what it's all about. See, because when we get to the 20th chapter of Numbers, we find a whole different problem when it comes to leadership. And the problem is then with Moses and Aaron themselves. Once again, they're in the desert, they're still there, and by now Miriam has died. And they're back in the same problem they've had so many times in the desert. There's no water. You're in the desert, there's no water, people are grumbling, you can't blame them. Hey, you get thirsty, you're going to blame the leader because it's his job to provide. So we read this in verses 8 to 12, Numbers chapter 20. God says to Moses, he says this, "Take your staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community, so they and their livestock can drink." So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, get this, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" And then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, the community and their livestock drank. Everything seems good, right? Perfect. God's provided water. Everybody should be happy. But get this. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I have given them." They've just produced water for the people. What could be wrong? But God is not happy with them. In fact, he's so unhappy that Moses and Aaron, for all they've done, will never get to enter the promised land. Why? What happened? What went wrong? You see, for everything that's made it look like Moses is in charge and that Moses is the leader, Moses and Aaron had forgotten their place. They had forgotten their place. You see, because when he said to the people, "Must we bring you water?" Who gave them water? Did Moses and Aaron give them water? No, God gave them water. Every time that they had been provided for, it wasn't Moses and Aaron, it was God. But now Moses is pointing to himself as being the provider. And what's more, how did he do it? What did God say to him? He said, "Speak to the rock, and it will provide water." And what did he do? He struck the rock. See, that's what he had to do the first time. We'll strike the rock. But now God is just saying to him, what a test this is, right? God comes up to you and says, "Hey, Donna, speak to that rock over there, and it's going to gush out enough water to give for 2 million people and all around us." No problem, right? But he strikes the rock. As if he had to do something. He couldn't just trust God and take him at his word. He forgot his place. Human leaders have a tendency to do that. We forget that we're just servants. Sometimes, there's one person who always comes to me and says, "Hey boss, how you doing?" The reality is that in this place, I'm not the boss. Joan's not the boss. Jim's not the boss. No one here is the boss. Who's the boss? God and God alone is the boss. And when we forget that, things will go astray, because then we're going to start to do things that we think we want, that we think is best. And we will take the credit. And if we fail, we'll take the blame. But it's all about God. Human leaders often lose sight of their place and their need for submission to God, and that's what happened to Moses and Aaron. In the most extreme cases, that leads to cult leaders. And we've seen see about them every now and then in the news, and the horrific stories of people following these cult leaders. The point, as I said, is Moses and Aaron are only servants. And that's the same for every one of us. It's how we view ourselves, as we must always see ourselves as nothing but servants of the one who is in charge. If someone comes into here and says, take me to your leader, who do we take them to? Ultimately, it has to be to Jesus. If the question comes up of who's in charge here, it's God and God alone. Moses and Aaron could only be effective and godly leaders to the extent that they remained servants of God and of the people. But the people also had to be servants. They all had to recognize who was in charge. And that means that we need to submit every aspect of our life. And sometimes we take charge of things in our lives where we have no business. And we don't submit them to God. Take me to your leader. Who's in charge? Today, we have to recognize and surrender ourselves. That's one of the biggest words that we need to recapture in the church, is to surrender to the leadership of God. Every bit of our lives, every moment, every choice, every value, every aspiration, every dream, every desire, every moment, all my days and all my hours, submitted to God, because He's the only master. Let's pray. Our Father God, I thank you so much that we can come to you